Hello, today we will discuss the book Jailbreak, Chapter 3, Finding the Key. So let's take a moment and raise your hand to begin the discussion. I will flick through the pages. Okay. If it's okay, I'll begin the discussion. There's something very interesting here. The 3 planes of connection. And I think this is extremely interesting. So she talks about the transcendent connection, the interpersonal connection, and the intrapersonal connection. So the transcendent is about connecting to something bigger, could be God, could be the divine, the field. The interpersonal is person to person. And it begins here with the parent-child connection and morphs into friend and romantic connections. And the third plane of connection is the intrapersonal, the most interesting. And I love what she says here. She says, the author says, I think of this as my connection to my wise heart. From this place, I can observe the multiplicity that is my mind, fully connecting with all the parts of me, the ones that are free as well as those that are imprisoned. I can hear the stories and soothe the pain of those incarcerated. I can help them see that they're not alone. My wise heart is always available. This intrapersonal place is sacred. It's more important than anything else, this kind of connection. It's accessed through the area around the heart, not through the head. Thus, at any given moment, we're actually able to find the sense of belonging and secure attachment. So secure attachment exists within every single one of us. So she says, in other words, we always have access to the key that will free us. Wow, what a concept. Now, 12-step talks about connection to the God, the divine, the transcendence. And I think IFS has taken it a step further and says, okay, that can be great, but connection to the intrapersonal connection to the wise heart, that's even more important. So I am a little bit curious, guys. Some of you might have done know about the 12-step. How does that compare? The connection to something transcendent. And I know, a lot of people use God, guides, angels, to connect. They connect that, and it's so helpful. Yeah, Marlene?
Yes, I really like these 3 connection planes. And I am surprised that the intrapersonal is the most important. Although I think they're all necessary. In 12-step ideas, the divine is also within. There's a lot of references to God being inside of us. The great reality is within all of us. It's quite metaphorical at times. So in that way, I find it relatable to the self with a big S. And that's really helpful that there's always an essence. Different cultures call it by different names, but I think universally we have that inner essence that is always healthy and can't be erased or annihilated. So that's quite, yes, it's very encouraging, especially when I get depressed, because I tend towards depression, and then I have to really watch to look to not filter out the glimmers, the micro moments that are uplifting, because it's a matter of thinking as well and focusing. You know, where am I focusing? Because there is that multiplicity. So thank you very much. I'm finished.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, I think people bring to 12 step whatever they bring, which can be anything. So, and 12 step is different things in different conditions. And I think, as you remember, we used to have a group on this loving parent guidebook, which is an ACA 12 step,
Yeah.
which is IFS-Informed. It's about the
Mm-hmm.
part within. That's that
Yes.
book,
The Loving
which
Parent guidebook. Yeah,
is
that's
all
right.
about
Yes.
connection within. So 12 step, because it's everything, it's whatever it is, and I think, ACA, I'm sorry, adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families is a 12 step fellowship, which very much I was asking somebody recently, because I've not been to a meeting. I said, do people in there talk about IFS? He said, not so much in the meeting, but afterwards, there's loads of people talking about IFS. So, it's because, and as well, I'd say, without even saying that, the step 4 really gets you in touch with yourself. You have to go within. Step 4 is a total and fearless moral inventory of yourself. In other words, a total examination of your state of mind and being at this time, which can take a few months. And it's really getting honest with who you are and where you are. And it's another way of looking at that is getting in touch with your parts, being completely honest, looking at where you are in a prayerful way or in a reflective way, if you want to put it that way. So I don't think there's any difference between 12. I mean, not the only difference. It depends what you bring to 12 step. It's open for anybody and everything. And within the 12 steps, that process of growth is what it's all about. That's the recovery through growth, and growth comes from within. And I think, like Marlene said, the idea of a higher power to keep conscious contact with higher power can be, there's Buddhists in who would say the higher self, or there are people who are in ICA like myself and other people who would talk about the inner self as self. And then self is grounded in whatever you want to call God, which is all about love. It's all those C. I was with Frank Anderson last week. Don't use the C words. He said, people get hung up on the C words, but that connection with God, whatever God is, all the good things. So yeah. So I don't see a difference. I think it's a process. They're both a process, and 12 step is a structure to get well from whatever it is you want to get well from overeating, from
Mm-hmm.
alcohol, from drugs, from dysfunction in your family, from parents who are toxic. That's ACA. So yeah, I'm finished. Thanks.
Thank you. Anne?
I thought it was interesting they said that the intrapersonal being the central and most important. And I think they're all extremely important. And I was wondering, maybe one way of thinking of the intrapersonal is perhaps the most important is if you imagine the others without the intrapersonal, like if you were only interpersonal, then you could be, overly giving or overly, pleasing. And if you were only the spiritual, you could be more in danger of spiritual bypassing and not dealing with like hidden issues. And so, but if you were mostly like within yourself, maybe you don't need as people as much or whatever, or not everyone is as spiritual. These are such important things, right? It's hard to imagine that they're not all very important, but I guess I can kind of see the argument for why maybe the intrapersonal is the most foundational, because if someone did not need loads of other people, but they had a good relationship to themselves because they were very introverted and they weren't very spiritual, so they didn't need that, but they did have a very strong intrapersonal relationship. That seems the most still whole compared to only having one of the other ones.
Yes. I like the spiritual bypass. I love that you said that. Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I just was thinking as well, because there's the issue of those people who are broken within themselves, who don't have a relationship with themselves. That's what the whole thing is. You know, if you're so damaged internally, you wouldn't even know it. You just, so you need something outside, which appears outside, and it will take you to the healing within. But a lot of people come to, you know, are very damaged in the self-image.
So possibly,
yeah, go on.
possibly, so somebody who's very damaged may need a connection with God initially.
That's what I'm saying, to bring them to themselves. Over time, because they'll be guided and learn to discern and to work at, you know, I mean, I work with people who've got very poor self-image, and so you can't just say get in touch with yourself, because it just doesn't, you know, it takes time to get to that place. So yeah, the idea of God, which is without, but it's also within. I was talking to somebody, an example the other day, somebody who's struggling majorly in life with addiction still. And they said they put a prayer out to God, and they were in a really bad time that day. And then they said, well, this thought came to me, and I don't know if it was me or from God. The thought was, be compassionate yourself. That thought came to them, sounds simple, be compassionate with yourself. That inspiration came, and that led them to go down a different track in the mind, rather than a self-hatred in the middle of them in their addiction. They were actually in their addiction on that day in a really dark place. But came, be compassionate with yourself when they put that out. So yeah.
I have a little bit of a, you know, I'm unsure a little bit. For my system, I find that the intrapersonal and the transcendent overlap. So because I have a sense that my self energy feels transcendent, feels bigger than myself. Yeah, it feels like spiritual. Yeah.
Sorry, people.
Yeah, go say it.
I need to say I'll finish. But just there's a quote from a mystic. You know, the eye with which we see God is the same eye with which God sees us. In other words, there's no overlap in the end. The same eye.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that's from Meister Eckhart. He's not Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle took his name from Meister Eckhart. He was a 400-year-old German mystic who's anyway finished.
Thank you. Yeah, Mary Jane.
Yeah, I did a 12-step once at church. You know, it was called Celebrate Recovery, and it was just all different kinds of you could have any depression, anything. It wasn't just, you know, like addiction, but and it was a Christian based, so it was very much Jesus was the higher power. And so I grew up traditional Christian, you know, Catholic and or non-denominational. So it's always that higher power is always outside of ourselves. So it's been a real concept to change that into it can be right inside of us as well. And which is what I'm getting from IFS, that it can be that higher power can be right within us. Right. And could you please define, I don't own the book yet, interpersonal and transcendent. What are those meanings?
Intrapersonal is between you and your parts, self and parts. And transcendent is you and God, divine, the field, or whatever bigger sense, whatever it is.
Okay.
It's out there.
And is there a term for the God that's like inside of us, or connecting with ourself inside of us is also transcendent on some sort?
Well, I think it's the intrapersonal, like between self. I think, I don't know. Yeah, Gracia,
interpersonal. It's person to person. That's a second plane of connection. It's on page.
There's interpersonal and intrapersonal.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Interpersonal is person to person. They sound the same, similar. And And
when you
intrapersonal is the one between the connection to my wise heart, it says. So parts and self.
All right, because there's 3 planes. I got it.
Yeah.
You gave the lead into this discussion. Something you said really resonated with me. It was something about that inside of ourself, we can connect with a higher power or something. I don't know. Somehow something the way you said it, it was just like, wow, that is so powerful. I can't remember exactly what you said.
Who was it? Me? The great reality within is something I refer to that's out of AA 12 step. They do say that ultimately you will find the greater power inside yourself. It is within. And they quoted the greater reality within with a big G and a big R. But that's just metaphorical.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I really think, I mean, you know, Dick Source talks about self being like a spiritual, there's a sense of spirituality around the self. So yeah, I'm not sure. Anne?
Oh, I was just going to add what you said, that he talks so much about the self being the transcendent self and being connected to like the large, something so much larger. And in the Buddhist like perspective, the God is within. So there are those maybe in more shamanistic type perspective spirituality, the God is within, and those have a lot of overlap with IFS, I think. Like he'll talk about it being like the Buddha self or the shamanistic self. Yeah, and I really relate to what you said, Vana, about, yeah, I think definitely in self energy, it is a very spiritual feeling space, no matter what your belief systems are, but there is a sense of bigness and connection to something big and beyond one's own small individual self. And
Yeah.
so maybe they're all kind of intertwined, the sense of connecting to others and spirituality and being in harmony with parts and self. They're all kind of, in the way, it's the same, right? It's just what you're kind of spotlighting.
You're so right. So right. Because attunement, okay, you need attunement and learn how to attune through other people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that's a question I always wonder about IFS, because Richard Schwartz would say, oh, you know, IFS is different from attachment theory because we believe that there is just self even without a secure attachment. But then you never know, because he still was there as the therapist, or some IFS therapist was there to witness.
Yeah, that's why self-therapy is not, it cannot be as successful as therapy with another person, because you can't learn attunement where you never received it. You have to have a therapist to have that experience. So are you complete? Yeah.
Yes.
Good thing. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing about God and whatever else, you know, this is a book which I love. I did it when I did my degree. When God die. And it's about the fact that we continually have to reassess because it's a journey. We're only human, and it's a growth. I've just changed to a chapter in here. How it fits with this chapter 5, liberation of the heart, which is very much about what we. So you know,
Paul, here a quick question. Shall I put you on? Shall I spotlight you, because you are showing really interesting resources, or you don't want to pass on that? No, okay.
Okay, yeah, I can talk because I think I'm not on the screen at the moment.
Okay, all right, okay. Just to make sure that the other people know about the resources, because I love the resources you're showing.
Well, it's called When Gods Die, but it's a Carmelite book. I'm a member of member of that religious order. Carmelite is all about going within. It's about God within. It is about God without as well, but it's about God within. And this is called When Gods Die, and it's looking at spirituality with the Jungian understanding as well. So it's a modern look at psychology and spirituality. But no, it's interesting that I just it's about liberation of the heart, and he's the person about John of the Cross, and he was the first person. He was a poet, the Dark Night of the Soul. He was the one who said that. And Dark Night is not a darkness. It's about darkness of our intellect and our knowing towards God, because we don't know God in the end, because God is beyond. In ourselves, we transcend. That word transcend, we always transcend. So anyway, yeah. So this is by John Welsh, is an O calm, which is an ancient calm light, and When Gods Die, and it's an introduction to John of the Cross. But anyway, just saying that this is all about liberation of the heart, finding freedom and growth and the inner journey, because in the end, all this stuff is about transformation and growth. And in 5 years' time, I'd be saying we might all be, or may not, but be saying something different about, because we moved on in life and life moves on. Yeah, it's in the chat there.
Yeah, brilliant.
Welsh O'Connor.
When Gods Die, Jack Welch.
John Welch.
John?
John. Yeah, John Welch. So yeah, a Jungian interpretation of John of the Cross.
Yeah.
Yeah, finished. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, is it W-E-L-C-H?
Yes. Welsh. John Welch.
Yeah, and the description, it says Jack's. On the book, it says John. And so it's like John F. Kennedy was nicknamed Jack. It's the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Right, yeah.
Oh, and the beautiful poem. Wow, brilliant.
He's a poet. John of the Cross primarily is a poet. That's how he talks in poetry.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah. And what was the poem titled? The Dark Night of the Soul.
The Dark Night of the Soul. He wrote 4 major poems.
Yeah.
One of them, The Dark Night
of the Soul by St. John of the Cross.
Yeah.
So people can find it on Google.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to share and then I stopped, but now I'm going to share on the thing about the attachment theory that Dick talks about, that we don't, that we have it within. He's referring to that. Yes, we do need attunement, and we need, someone to co-regulate with, but like he was referring to working with people with the worst firefighters, like criminals that were incarcerated, that even they had that self within, and that they could get attachment from having someone self-led with them, like that. You don't. So there was a theory years ago that if you didn't have healthy attachment as a child, that you were doomed, that there was no hope. So what he's referring to is that, no, that's not true, that we all have within us the capacity to develop healthy attachment by tapping into the inner resource, that it's not doomed. Like that's what he was referring to when he talked about that the attachment theory says that you need another human being in order to access self, but that's, or have, or be even to be able to heal. And that's not true, because every human being was born with it. It's innate. And so that was his reference to that.
I have a question. So, because my understanding is, ideally you have like a therapist or whatever, someone who can show you what you learn attunement through this kind of relationship. It's extremely hard to do, IFS therapy on yourself, especially in the beginning. There are loads of benefits, but it's difficult.
That's not what it means. It doesn't mean that you have to do this work by yourself and grow your self-energy. What it means is that you have the capacity to grow it.
Yeah. Yeah. We all have the capacity. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. It is so strange that even the most damaged and traumatized people, we all have this inner source of self-energy.
And then there's the science of neuroplasticity, that our brains can always rewire and get new. I mean, not all, there are some people that have brain injury, but that, yeah, there's always possibility and hope, because the brain has the capacity to rewire.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Guys, I'm gonna flick through this chapter 3, and just quickly to mention about this example, because she spent quite a few pages talking about Sarah. let's see. And what is it about Sarah? Uh, Sarah, she did everything. She became a yoga teacher. She went to retreats. She was learning about Buddhism. She did absolutely everything nonstop. She was very, very successful in her job. But she said it was also clear that in her family, belonging and enoughness were only conferred with great achievement. As a child, this meant perfect grades, awards and scholarships and leadership roles. And she did all that. And she's working, she's got a career at a Fortune 500 company. And she's looking for why does she feel empty? And she's trying everything and she's still empty, feeling empty. So she went to what's her name? The name of the author, Angela. She went to the author's to see the author for help, and she was talking a lot. And this is what I find interesting. The author says, I could really help her if she would only slow down and listen for a minute. I tried to interrupt a few times, but to no avail. So I sat back and waited patiently. I knew Sarah needed to talk until she felt safe with me. And then further down, he says, I know that attunement takes time. But when she feels safe, she can be vulnerable. And like Sarah, we can all fall into the trap of looking outside of ourselves for the answer. After all, our first models of connections were outside of ourselves, interpersonally with our caregivers. It often doesn't occur to us that the void we feel could be healed from within, intrapersonally. We are guilty of both seeking meaning and peace and then making them impossible to find because we cannot get out of our head and into our heart long enough to listen to ourselves about what we actually need, what is true for us. I've got here a question or something that I find interesting because in IFS, when someone starts their IFS therapy, I have noticed with my own kind of clients that, they do have a lot of narrative parts or storytelling parts, and we have names for them. Oh yeah, people have got a narrative part, a storytelling part, or whatever else, a logical part. But here in this book, it says that, for example, for Sarah, she needed to talk because talking, having a narrative part, has helped her to feel safe. So I don't know, what does that make sense at all to you guys? Any of you, what do you think about the the value of talking? Because IFS is not talk therapy. It's about going inside. So yeah, Paul.
But reminded with that Frank Anderson during this week, but there's the parts that need to be witnessed. Their story needs to be heard.
Yes, the story needs to be heard. But
of the parts that have been
yeah.
wounded, that need unburdening perhaps, or need to be heard, or need to be witnessed. Therefore, there's a narrative to be said.
Yes. But it's not coming from the parts. That's the issue. That's the problem. So yeah.
Well, it could be. I think it could be. I mean, the parts may have something to say about, I don't know. Don't the parts?
Yeah. They're desperate to be heard. Desperate.
Yes.
I think that's the sense I get, assuming, because I don't know Sarah, but yeah. I know. Thank you. Gracia?
Yes, so the narrative part or figuring it out part, for me, storyteller part, right? A part so for me, it is a part that's connecting the dots. and it knows the story, but it doesn't have the emotion attached to it like the protector or exile that is in that story. So it's helpful, but it's not where the healing happens. Even though it helps the witnessing piece, that part is really, in my system, it's really important. And I do go, if I have a client that has that part, we can stay with that part and welcome that part and let that part talk. And then hopefully that part, once it's said everything it needs to say, can give space so that we can get to the ones that were in the story, present, right? Like it's almost like the observer is, for me, in my system, and even clients, like it's almost like you that part when it's talking, it's like it's like repeating memories that, like, it's almost like, you're told like a story by a parent, but you weren't there, like about your birth or about, like, it's like secondhand information, right? Like it's not
Yes,
the
it is.
part that is doing this is not the one that experienced the trauma or the burden. It just knows about it, and it's only through, and it might not see this. What's really important about it is it might not have the story completely right. So that's why it's really important to go, and it doesn't have the whole story, because the one who the parts of us that have experienced it, that lived it, that felt it, they know the whole story. They know the whole truth. And so when you get the space, and like I said, I can go through a whole session in my own. I just did the other day, like 2 hours of maybe 80% storytelling parts and maybe 20% going inside, like, and being with the parts that the story was around. So it is something that for my system, I need that storyteller to be able to say stuff. And then even when I am doing insight and I am with the part that the story is about, when that part comes in, that narrator, that figure out, whatever you want to call it, maybe I have a few, it just helps to connect the dots. Like it's like, oh, okay, now that makes sense. Like it almost, so, and this is just another example that our parts are not separate. They work in harmony, and that they can help each other. And so that's what that for me is the story. But the story, someone who tells the same story who has a part that perseverates and says the same story over and over again, that's a part that's a little different, right? Like it's almost like it feels like it's never been heard, or it believes that maybe some other parts in the system don't get it. So it has to repeat over and over the story. So it's a very important part, I think, in many, many people's systems, but it's not where the healing happens. So when the healing happens is when you can get to the part who was actually there, that actually felt the energy from the event that happened, like that. So that's where it can lead us to be with the one who carries the burden, right? Or the ones that are protecting the burden, like getting to know them directly is really where the healing happens. And if a person can't get back to, earlier, if a person can't access self for whatever reason, their trauma, their addictions, right, their firefighters, whatever, that's where direct access comes in. That the person, there are people for years, they never are able to do insight. So it's really important that someone who's facilitating someone like that, who is an active firefighters or manager roles, that they have someone who has self-energy on the other side of them, helping them to get to know that part directly, rather than just have that part be the storyteller and talk about all their fears and concerns. So it's all, like I said, it's all important. All parts are welcome. And it is a clove of a story. And the narrator might be a part of that clove, right? Like, you ever hear of like some parts that dissociate and they go above and they watch what's happening? Like they're not in your body. I've had this several times in my life. I have parts that they watch from above. And that could be the part that is like telling the story, because the one who was in it shut down or froze, or, the one who was actually present for the abuse or assault or whatever you want to call it has checked out, right? Another part took over, and they can't remember. It's protecting them. So the one that is up and above and watching can be the one, for me, like I actually, have it almost like a visual of it as like it's like a bubble quote, right? Like you ever watch like a cartoon, you know how they have the quotes of what they're saying? That's how my part shows up for me. It like comes in and says, no, this is what happened. Like, because I have a part that just doesn't know. It was checked out. So I know I'm going on and on, but I hope that makes sense.
Oh, wow. Yes, so much. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Anne.
Yeah, it was great, Gracia, what you said. And to add to that, I think there is like a theory of trauma that is when we actually have a fractured narrative about what happens, and it's actually just this inaccurate, disconnected narrative. And so it's this, how do you connect your narrative or storytelling part to the actual feelings of all the other parts and the emotional experiences that they had? And well, I think Oscar Wilde had a quote about writing, and it was something about like you shouldn't write from the words first. You should write from the heart of the experience and the feelings, and have the heart of the experience, and then let the words arise from that. So it's like the words are secondary that come as a, come out of the feeling and the raw experience. And I guess it's teaching the system to listen to the parts that I've experienced, and then the storytelling parts, they are helping, right? They're helping overlay the narrative, and they're helping propose new narratives that are maybe more helpful and open up new ways of having meaning, like new meanings that might be helpful. But they have to really be grounded in first, having us being able to access the emotional core and all the emotional parts, and only then it's like the story is in service of the emotions, and they're adjusting to the emotions, versus I think when the cognitive bypassing happens, someone just uses the story to like, shove away the emotions, or, pat away and make things pat. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Oh, brilliant. Mary Jane?
Yeah, I was, and Gracia, if I could ask again, please, you said healing happens, if you can even remember back to what you said, but it was to do with the concept that healing happens when we finally get in touch with what happened to us. Could you expand on that a little bit more?
So what happens when we can hear the story from the healing happens when the part that experienced the event is witnessed and heard and able to be with the feelings of not even just the event, the day of the event, but the aftermath, the fallout. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'll
Because
tell you what,
narrator isn't that one.
what?
So do you ever tell a story and you're totally not emotional at all? Like you could just say it without having feelings?
Uh-huh.
That's that one, right? It's not connected to the feelings associated, right? So that's no healing is gonna, I shouldn't say no healing. Unburdening can occur in that, right? Because
Yeah,
think about it, how many people tell their story over and over and over and over again? And why are they telling it over again? Because it's stuck, it's trapped. It's not released. You can't release it and unburden it if the one who experienced it hasn't been seen. And so that one prevents, it almost blocks the feeling from coming forward. It's a distraction sometimes. Protecting the exile who carries the feeling, so that doesn't come up and get overwhelming, right?
right. Yeah. And I'm such a proponent too of, because I went through about 2 years of EMDR, and that really helped me get into that, being with that part that went through those traumatic circumstances. And again, I'm in a group of women who are, sexual abuse survivors. And they also fund people to do EMDR. And somebody there's who told me about IFS. She's like, it's a really great companion to EMDR. Because and then somebody said, they said it helped reverse the lies that the trauma brought to me. The lies. And I thought I think EMDR is also kind of an unburdening process. It was really, I just remember being in this session once and processing through something, and then EMDR kind of helps you then create other ways of looking at it. Somehow that bilateral stimulation opens your brain up to being able to look at things from other perspectives. And I just remember like the light bulb going off so big in one session in particular. So I'm a big proponent for EMDR too. And I just, and I'm interested in how does IFS get into that same kind of, it's like breaking up the knots. It felt like with EMDR somewhat, and how IFS compares to that. I'm complete.
I can answer that, or I could wait until Marlene and Paul go.
Go ahead,
Gracia,
Gracia.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I too have done EMDR, and so I know what that's like, what you just described, like that shift, right, that happens. So what's similar in that is that with EMDR, you're actually the binaural or the bilateral stimulation is doing the rewiring, right? And so what you're doing is you may have a storyteller who goes back to that memory, and then as you're tapping or whatever, you can also resourcing, right, is really important. So with EMDR, there's resourcing, as you know, like, so you develop characters or people. Like for me, I had like Mr. Rogers as a resource. I had like an Amazon woman as a resource. So rather than having like God or self energy, we develop these resources that are positive and comfortable and powerful, right? And they get tapped in. So that's the difference there. You're not using self energy in EMDR, right? Like to heal. But what the magic that happens in EMDR is also the safe place that you created. So you have your resources, you have a safe place, and you go back and you release. So the unburdening piece in IFS is very similar to when you get to that place where you're going into the resourced place in your mind and letting go. Like for me, it's just an example. I had some trauma that I had a place that I went to that was like a waterfall and beautiful and lush with butterflies, and my releasing of the trauma was sent off with the butterflies into the sky, right? Like that was like my EMDR, like one of my, I did it for over a year. But with IFS, what the difference is that self-energy is with, when you have your self-energy with the memory of the trauma, then together your system can release it. When you do get to that burning, the steps are totally different. You can release it to the elements, right? It's not like you're resourcing you let the parts choose where they want to release it, what that looks like, how it goes, right? Earth, water, light, right? All those things. So it's very similar in the releasing, except that IFS allows the parts to choose specifically how they want that to be released. Where with EMDR, you have a part that's picking a resource, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about. If anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, the first stage of EMDR is tapping in resources. Which can be a family member or God or, right, Mr. Rogers. And I had no family members that I could trust or so for me, it was, characters. I feel like I'm talking a lot. Sorry.
That's okay. That to me, the resource was just a place that if it got too much for me, I could go to and kind of like a safe place I could get away from the traumatic memories. So I really didn't feel any release there. It was just a place for me. But the EMDR process for me was the unraveling of the stories. That process is what was healing to me, because it got me to go deeper into my story, to make connections.
So that piece is about unblending in IFS.
That would be probably that part of
when you unblend, you get more clarity to see the story. What you're describing in EMDR is probably when you had space, right? Like it wasn't unblending, but it wasn't called that. You were able to be with your parts that knew the story, right? Because of the safety of the EMDR. So it's very similar, but it's quite different. In fact, for me, it was not good EMDR. It activated my firefighters. It also sent me like on a downward spiral. So for me, for complex trauma, it was not a good modality.
Yeah, it was exhausting, completely exhausting.
My
I
eyes
was
would roll
wiped
in the
out
back
for
of my
like 2
head. Like
days.
when I was done, I was spent. I was like, it was, yeah, too much.
I was too, me. I always had to make sure I didn't have anything scheduled for like the next day
Yes.
or two because I was wiped out. And then I had
So IFS is more gentle because it doesn't bypass protectors, where EMDR does that. And that's why the fallout happens.
yeah, and then I had a therapist who was brand newly trained, and they did not close the session with me. And so, you know, usually they get you back grounded before you go. And I went home just screaming. And I felt like that exhaustion for 2 months. I'm not kidding. It was crazy. So, yeah, so IFS
Me too.
is a,
I
yeah,
had
yeah.
that same experience, Mary Jane. And so then we started extending our sessions longer so that we could do the wind down, but it still wasn't, it made my system all out of whack. Really, it did.
Yes. And then I had a therapist who did more titrating where we'd go into it for like 30 seconds and then come back out. And that helped a lot. I wasn't exhausted after those kind of sessions. That helped too. So, but yeah, it's tricky.
And so the difference also with IFS is that you can't bypass, like unless there's a therapist who's making you bypass. IFS is gentler because it doesn't do that. You don't have to titrate. You don't have to go slow. Like your system will be like, oh, okay, this is enough. Let's stop. Like it's almost like more self-led for the client. The client leads how fast or slow you go.
And then with
EMDR is not like that.
Yeah, but then in IFS, do people always get to those roots then? Is that a goal, is to get to the roots to feel and understand where that story of the trauma of when you were in it and how getting in touch with that? Is that part of IFS?
It's where the healing happens, but it's not the goal. The goal is to get to know your system and unblend so that there's more clarity, so that there's trust, so you can get to the healing of the unburdening, right? It's not the goal though. You can have healing and shifts without doing that, but that's the ultimate depth of healing. Yeah. Great questions, Mary Jane. I love it.
And then people with their IFS therapists go into that deep unblending, like of the intricacies of their story of that. Would that be true?
Yes, that helps, but what it doesn't do is get permission from all the protectors who are protecting that exile. So it goes to the exile too fast. IFS says no, stick with your protectors until the protectors give the approval and the trusts. That's the huge difference.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, great discussion, guys. Thank you. Marlene?
Yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you. I was looking at that story with Sarah. She's trained to be in her head. That's pretty normal. A lot of us are trained to be in our head by, with the values of family and culture being achievement and competition rather than equality and collaboration. For me, it's easier to go to my heart from my head if I'm in the right hemisphere of my brain. So I'm noticing, and in AA, we call that the 2-foot drop. The 2-foot drop from your head to your heart. And so it's not an easy thing to do. I think that's what that metaphor means. But I'm seeing the brain as multiple. There's a left and right hemisphere, and I get stuck in my left hemisphere. And part of that was that poetry and art were not emphasized in my schooling. I had maybe 1/2 of a class of drawing, and that was it ever. And that's the way to reach the right hemisphere, or that's the expression of the right hemisphere. So I think that's why parts art is important. It's a way to go into the heart. There's also the heart brain and the gut brain. And those are all new concepts for me. So it's really difficult to do that untraining. When I went to college, that was the first time that there was a shift where we sat around in a circle where I went, and everybody was equal and everybody took part, and we showed each other our papers. It was open book tests. It was pretty phenomenal compared to high school, which was so rigid and you better not cheat. You know, collaborating was cheating. You don't compare your notes. You keep it all to yourself. Huge shift from head to heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, just on the back of that, just quickly, I was going to say about something about EMDR, but just to say I was very fortunate when I was at school. I was a very arty. My school, I did A-level art, advanced level art. I was in a drama group 7 years. And music was my big thing. My school was very much about the arts. It's a normal school in this country, which is very good. And one of the plays that took place, it doesn't exist. None of this was videoed. It was all in the 70s. Was a play that took place in my head. So the characters all played parts of me. They must have seen something in my traumatized childhood, because I played a comedian who was reminiscing about his past, and all the play took part, and I wrote the music for the play as well. And so I was the main character who the play took part in my head. The directors at that time the guy who was my main director went over to America. He's now a professor of drama somewhere in America, but he was the one who did. Anyway, that was a side thing. So I was very grateful. I've always been grateful for my art and music and drama from my school. The EMDR, I had the same experience. It was, and I'm saying this because I'm just last week and I'm still in the middle of it. There's a free PESI course, which turned up in my thing that I didn't even know anyway on EMDR, because my experience when I did it years, I've done 27 years of therapy so far in my life, all sorts of different therapies to do with my situation. EMDR, it was a bad experience for me. It threw me into my addiction. He didn't know this, so he was doing the work. I wasn't he'd not done, he was learning EMDR. He'd not done it right. I wasn't safe. And it just threw me after sessions into my addiction. Most sessions I go into my addiction. I mean, I was in my addiction anyway at the time. So it was just, maybe it says, it's not always the right, it's very anyway. I've just been doing this course, which is helping me to re-examine it. I'm not going to become an EMDR therapist, but at least I'm learning it in the way that it needs to be done. But what I was going to say is connected with that is this thing about witnessing and storytelling and whatever is, I've done a dive in the last 6 months, my journey, if you like, from the head to the heart. It involves things like, and I know I've mentioned this to Gracia, this is a book about a child killer. It's called Cries Unheard. Interesting. Cries Unheard. The Parts Not Heard. And it's a book which interviews her when she's an adult. She's been rehabilitated. She's from Newcastle in the UK. She killed 2 children when she was 10 years old, 11 years old. But it comes from, I'm going to give a load of books, but just saying anyway. Donna Winnicott, who I'm looking into deprivation and delinquency. And helping troubled children and developing minds. This is all by Michael Rutter. And I've just found another book just now about maternal deprivation. And the thing is, my parts find a voice when they're reflected in the stories of other people. So when I'm reading this, my parts are saying, yes, I'm not saying I've not killed children, but I had a problem when it's not funny, but in another way it is, but when it's not funny, really, no, it's not, of course not. But it's like, what made that girl the way she was, the fact she was, not all people who are born of prostitutes do that, but she was born of a prostitute, her family background, the trauma that she grew up in. Same with the Bulger case, I've looked into those. So because my childhood was so traumatized, and my parts find a voice in hearing the voices of other people who've gone through some similar thing. I mean, Mary Bell, that girl there, I can't get to the depths of how, whatever the word is, lost she was as a child. A mother tried to kill her 4 times by the age of 5. And she said when she was born, get that thing away from me. That was her birth into the world. And so she internalized that, you know, whatever. And it became killing the child outside because she was the child was dead within her. So sort of. So, you know, but that's on a scale, that's an extreme end of, you know, troubled children. And that's what interests me, is that I'm trying to discover my healing for my troubled childhood. And I find that the parts of me that are not spoken about every day, the traumas that I've gone through, but I find that in reading about other people, or, you know, Donald Winnicott, who's the genius child psychoanalyst. He's a child psychoanalyst. Donald Winnicott is, and this book, Deprivation, Delinquency, you know, yeah. Anyway, I'm just saying, but EMDR was not the right thing for me. I have to do it in a way that is, I'm the one these days who's managing my journey with my therapist, but I'm sensing what I can take and what I can't take, so I don't overwhelm, which is what EMDR did to me. Just too much. I've had too many traumas to go in a weekly session every week and just do. My current therapist knows this, so he deals with me gently as well. So, yeah. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Oh, wow. So I'm getting a sense that there's a few positive things around EMDR and quite a lot of negatives for people with complex trauma, especially with complex trauma. Yeah. Moving on, you know, how do we where is the entrance to the experience of connection? How? Oops. How do we, and I think now I lost my place. Mm-mm. $111.
It starts with our parents and then our friends and romance.
Yep. Yep. Page. Okay. Here. Okay. She mentions she gives a few practices to get into self. Okay, when you don't receive this support from your parents, when you don't receive the attunement, you don't learn, you don't have parents who are compassionate, so you can be compassionate to your own self, to your own parts. What happens then? And what happens, I mean, she says, she okay, she gives a couple of wonderful exercises. She talks about the 4x4x6 breathing and the sensing present time, like name 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, name 3 things you feel, 2 things you smell, and notice the taste in your mouth or taste of the beverage close at hand. Noticing and naming via your senses brings you back into the present time, because you actually have to be present in present time to do this. You can't be lost in thought and connected in your body at the same time. She explains a lot, you know, how those practices help the intentional breathing and sensing. There's a lot. I think she combines a lot of other science with IFS. you know, like people cannot multitask is misleading. No one can multitask. You can't be replaying what happened in the past or fretting about what might happen in the future and focused on the present at the same time. So you can focus only one thing. So being in charge of your focus is powerful. She says somewhere there that, you know, if you can't control your focus, then you'll be incarcerated. Focus and, you know, so focus is, so why does it help to focus on the five senses? Like name five things you see, hear, feel. This can bring you in the present moment. It takes you away from the fear and anxiety of the future. These practices bring us back into our window of tolerance. Which practices? The 60 to, okay, here she says, yeah, so when the parts of our brain shut down under stress, we have the opportunity to come back online. By doing the 60 to 90-second break, by having a 60 to 90-second break, that gives us the ability to notice our emotional and physical state rather than being hijacked by them. 60 to 90-second break gives us the space we need to come back to ourselves. Oh, having a little pause is so important. Having a pause is important. Paying attention on purpose is important. And here's something quite interesting. As the German biologist Carl Vogt, V-O-G-T, explained, the brain secretes thoughts like the stomach secretes acid. That is just what it does. The goal of mindfulness isn't to stop thinking, rather it is to notice that your thoughts have wandered and to redirect them back to where you want them to be. Now, IFS overlaps a little bit with mindfulness, but it is very, very different. But again, it takes a little bit of effort and focus. So what I'm saying, it's not easy. Yeah, the U-turn. Yeah, to do the U-turn exactly, you know, like Gracie, you put in the chat box, in the chat, the messages. Exactly. But to do the U-turn, you need to be in charge of your focus. You have to have this intentional focus. It doesn't come naturally. If you have not been, if you didn't grow up in an attuned household, in a compassionate, accepting, if your family hasn't given you those kind of, this kind of sense of safety. If you haven't got that, whew, yes, Anne.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I remember in the trauma, the shame and guilt book, there was a line that said that we discussed that said, it's not about learning a skill. They said, I think Cecil said, I forget the author now, but yeah, she had said that. Now, and then we discussed whether that was true. And I think we kind of agreed that there was a skill. And I think right now it's really pointing to the skill, which is an attentional skill, right? So a skill of being able to pay inner attention with that sensitivity and nuance and the patience. And I think these are skills.
Oh my God, that's wonderful. You just said that. Absolutely wonderful. Because why? There is a sense that like my understanding, how it's presented is like IFS is natural. Everyone can do it. We just work with your parts. You know, it's so natural. And yes, it is natural. And it also requires skill. here I found this bit. Having the ability to control our attention is liberating. The inability is imprisoning. But it takes skill to do the U-turn. It takes skill to look inside. And also, like, I think, and I agree with what she says, is like having that when we are activated, triggered, taking that 60 to 90 second time so we can do the U-turn. Skill and courage. Yeah, Marie is puts in the message. Self-led skill, Gresha, yeah. Yeah, it takes skill. So it's about learning that skill and courage to look inside, because it can get scary. There was something beautiful she said. Like, with IFS, I can't remember where it is, but let's see if I can find it. It's not about running away. I can't, from my memory, it's not about running away, but bringing curiosity towards this negative, whatever is happening, coming closer, not running away from emptiness, like Sarah felt emptiness and she's running away, trying, to come up with solutions, trying to figure it out. It's totally the opposite. Like, what can I really get close to that emptiness, to that vulnerability, get really from the place of curiosity. And only then we can begin the kind of healing. Yes, Anne?
It reminds me a lot, like when you talk about like art skills, it's a lot about like honing that sense of imagination and openness, and how Marlene said, like a much more right brain occupied state. And I find there's a lot of overlap with IFS. It's like you want to really hone the skills of being more in that felt sense and emotional connection. So yeah, it is the same way that people have skills for accessing music and creativity. I think there's some overlap in those skills as well as with IFS skills. That open.
Yeah, I did find this little place I had in mind, and I'm gonna read it. About Sarah. And Sarah learned to use her heart rather than her logic as her primary guidance system. To be clear, Sarah still loves to strive to be successful. That is important. The difference is that now the striving is to fill her curiosity, not her emptiness, not the kind of fear, being unworthy. That's not what motivates her. It's the difference between being chased and running toward. This kind of striving is energizing. Striving from a place of emptiness is exhausting. I totally love that. It's not, instead of being chased, you run toward. Wow. Being chased by the fears and the, emptiness. It's absolutely amazing, isn't it? It's absolutely like, wow. Yeah, Anne?
I find that such a big thing to like do some things for running towards and not being chased. And I feel like it's not necessarily so obvious sometimes. Like I might start something with the feeling of running towards, and then a lot of being chased creeps in in the middle of doing it. And I won't even become aware when all of a sudden I'm just feeling really stressed and contracted about what I'm doing.
Wow. Yes. Here, the author, she does have some kind of daily practices to bring self to parts, to kind of like, and some of the daily practices are like the breathing and the noticing 5 things. or whatever it is, the five senses. So let's see. Yes, it is. Yeah, exactly. They creep up, and then you have to take, like with everyone's life, in everyone's life, parts creep up, things come up, and then we do need to take a pause and look, do the U-turn. But when you know, she said, slow the wherever F down, slow down. She said she put that she wants to make fridge magnets. Put that on your fridge. Slow down. Okay. This is the most important thing to learn. Slow down. Yes, Marlene.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking, I don't know if I have ADHD or not, but I sure move around a lot. I'm just moving all the time. It's almost like I'm running away from myself with my own body. It's kind of hilarious, but it's aggravating. It can be aggravating the people around me. And I think there's a part of me, that energized part, that enjoys being bombarded by tons of information, like on YouTube and the internet and everywhere, the webinars, it's just so much. And there's a part of me that wants all of it. And you can't have all of it, So this rushing through everything and getting it piecemeal can be it's so diluted that I wouldn't learn from it. I wouldn't go into depth with any of it. So the need to focus is really, it reminds me of the flow that Csikszentmihalyi talks about. That when I focus and I'm so absorbed by what I'm focused on that I'm wholeheartedly in it, and my ADHD part can step aside a bit, and then I'm in that flow of focusing and savoring and enjoying, and not timing myself on, okay, how long am I in here? I need to go somewhere else and do something else. That's an enjoyable experience. But you're right, it's a skill and it is difficult, and I have to develop it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunately or fortunately or whatever, I have this sense this is not going to happen overnight. It's a lifelong journey for everyone. It lasts your entire life. It's not as if you develop your skill and that's it. It's like, oh yeah, we know it all now. We don't need to work at it. It's here, guys, before we end our session today, our recorded session, I'm gonna read you what she does every day. Okay, that's her, and I think Angela Huebner, the author, I believe she says that she does this every day. This is the practice she does, and heart coherence. And it says here, the HeartMath Institute suggests the practice called quick coherence technique. It combines breathing and focused attention. I use it daily. So the first step is heart-focused breathing. Imagine that your breath is flowing in and out from the area around your heart. This requires focusing your attention on your chest rather than on the thoughts in your head. Inhale for the count of 5 and exhale for the count of 5. All the while visualizing the breath coming in and out of your heart. This balanced breathing begins to calm your nervous system, balancing the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches. So that's the first step, the heart-focused breathing, okay? And I actually love this. Now we come to the second step, which it's about reaching for a positive feeling. Now, I do have a question around this one, the second step. And here it is, I'm gonna read it out. Reach for a positive feeling. This can be done by recalling the joy you feel when your dog wags his tail at your arrival home, the giggles of your children, the bliss of that first sip of coffee in the morning, the sound of the cardinal in the tree outside, or the sound of your daughter singing in the shower. It's something you appreciate or have gratitude for. Really try to embody the positive feeling state while you're breathing through your heart. In other words, imagine seeing the image, smelling the smells, feeling the textures, and hearing the sounds. Continue for several minutes, all the while feeling the breath coming in and out through the heart. And this is like reflections. So, any reflections around those two practices that she uses on a daily basis?
That's beautiful. I've heard, just concentrating on the five senses, but her getting in touch with then a positive memory. I love that.
Yeah. So she uses this is like her gratitude technique or practice. And I'm a little bit, I have a few skeptical parts around that. Because, when you're really anxious, for example, do you really want to practice gratitude? Yeah. Paul.
Yeah, back to 12 step. I mean, that's part of, well, it is in UK. I don't know about in America, but part of 12 step practice here is the gratitude list for people to write 5 things down. Well, average 5 things down at the end of the day. Think through 5 things you can be grateful for. And that is when people are in their addiction. It's to look still for what things can I be grateful for today? Simple as roof over my head, food on the table, whatever it is, or there's just a sunny day or something simple. So that is part of 12-step practice, which is good to remember. Or on a weekly basis, what good things this week. That's why I said at the beginning of this, I've had a difficult day or difficult week, but 2 things I'm grateful for so far today. Well, 3 now, because this has been a good meeting. So I've had 3 things today that I'm grateful for, but no doubt maybe 4. Something else that's happened. So 4, I've already got 4 things, and I only woke up at 4 o'clock in UK time because I'm staying in bed a lot these days. But I've had 4 things since 4 o'clock, so that's a good thing.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, Mary Jane.
Yeah, gratitude's great, really important. I also see your point, Vanna, that if you bypass, like, okay, am I allowed to feel my feelings and anxiety? And I have to bypass that to all of a sudden feel grateful. I think it's also not like, it almost feels shame for being, could almost be like, I could see like a shame for being anxious. Like, oh, I'm not supposed to feel anxious. I'm supposed to feel grateful. So I think it's like a combination of the two.
Mm-hmm.
Allowing yourself to have that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Anne?
Oh, I was going to add to what Mary Jane said that I think it's also part of the skill to know when it's a good time to try to be grateful in a hard time and when it's a good time to let yourself, nurse your parts or take a rest or whatever. So it's like, is there room for ever trying to introduce gratitude when things are hard? I think there is a skill to develop, but it's certainly not all the time and not always, right? And so it's learning to discern when we want to make that push and when we want to nurse something else in ourselves.
Yeah, that's great. Love it. Yeah, Marlene?
I like to sequence. Gratitude is the last part, and the buildup is with the breathing. I'm always surprised how powerful just breathing is. I mean, they're slowing it down. 5 and 5. Wow. I usually do 4 and 4, so that's very slow breathing. And that slow exhalation, totally polyvagal, that it totally gets back into that vagus thing. Oh boy. And then that sets the stage. Now my nervous system is calm and receptive. And yes, I think you're right. It could get energized again. It can go up again. But just these slow breaths. Oh my goodness. And then visualizing the breath. So you're really focusing on the breath and not thinking about anything else. And then the second one is reach for a positive feeling. Well, the positive feeling could be that the breath gave me a calmer space.
Yeah.
Just that, okay, that release of whatever tension there was. It could be as simple as that.
Oh, wow. Yes.
And then, yeah, there's always something in my environment. I live in kind of a Mexican neighborhood, so there's always Mexican music, which I love. and there's always a bird. There may be a vulture high up in the sky. So there's geese flying over every night at a certain time. Right over my house, I can look up and see the little band around their neck, you know. So yeah, that just jazzes me. And then gratitude, gee, for the three things above. That's gratitude. Because I'm not all that grateful generally. I'm kind of a pessimist, you know, a grumpy old lady, you know. So yeah, this is a great sequence. Thank you.
Oh, Marlene, I love that you said that, because yes, the breathing will put you into this kind of window of tolerance. It's like it reminds me of the polyvagal stuff. And then you're more likely to feel gratitude, to step into gratitude. I had thought, I mean, because we discussed this before about the value of gratitude, and is gratitude a good practice? We question that. It's not the first time we questioned it before. I did like this, like, before you do your gratitude list, first do your resentment list. And once you witness those parts that are resentful, okay, and you acknowledge them, you respect them, you honor them, you can also honor your whatever things you're grateful for. But now it's confusing, because if you do take the breaths, if you do the breathing exercises, that will set you up for a more positive outlook. So maybe there will be no room for resentments. Maybe in that kind of time. So any other thoughts, guys, before we close? Yep, Mary Jane. Yeah.
Well, so just getting back to like the moral inventory of the 12 steps, we're really getting a detailed map of your parts, basically, so I think there's room for everything, that's part of the wholeness of what it takes to heal.
The moral inventory, what is that
Yeah,
about?
I think that's step 4, is that, Marlene and Paul? It's where you go
Yes.
really in deep depth of, like,
You look at your
I can remember.
character traits. Yeah, you look at your character traits that are flawed and human, and then you look at your assets too, but they call them character defects. They're not really defects, they're just patterns that persist.
Yeah. And I had a really great sponsor, because she helped me realize stuff I was taking on that wasn't my burden to take on. And that was really eye-opening. I was really thankful for my sponsor walking me through all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone
That's
else?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, that's what I said at the beginning, that the 12 step is getting to know yourself, because that process you can do a quick 4th step, which you can do that over a period of a month or 2 months. Some people do it quickly, some people do it slowly, and I remember part of that, the way I did it once was list 30 positive qualities about yourself. That is hard work. List 30, which over a period of time you can observe the good things you do again, things that you might overlook in one's day to day, that I did this today, I did that the other day, I did this, did that. But that's quite a tough part. It's easier to sometimes list the negatives about you. Well, speaking for myself, list the negatives about myself than the positives. But when you actually look, that is part of one's, so that's a moral inventory.
Yeah. Okay. So Mark put some comments. I'm gonna read them out. Mark says, calmness of mind is one of the beautiful jewels of wisdom. It is the result of long and patient effort in self-control. Its presence is an indication of ripened experience and of a more than ordinary knowledge of the laws and operations of thought. James Allen. And step 4 of the 12-step program encourages one to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of themselves. This involves identifying our problems and getting a clear picture of how our behavior has affected ourselves and others around us in order to proceed to recovery. Gosh, this chapter is very deep. And as I'm reading this about the inventory, about the moral inventory, I'm reminded that in this chapter 3 of Angela Huebner's book, she says here, we tend to see what matches the patterns of experience we've already had. So if we have problems and our behavior will depend on patterns of experiences we've already had as children, possibly, or younger, in our younger experiences, that would affect. So I don't know. I mean, the 12-step program feels a little bit too kind of like clinical organized, but IFS is more organic, more whatever comes up in the session. It feels a little bit too logical, this 12-step program, to me. I don't know, but I haven't got a personal experience. Steps 6, other than the book we were reading in a group. Steps 6 to 7 involve integration. Okay. Gracia said inventory of resentments, defenses, fears, assets. It's hard work to start thinking about what are my resentments, defenses, fears, and assets. And with IFS, you just go in there and just see, look inside, U-turn. Wow, it feels like so much easier and like organic. Like you don't have to have your figuring out part. Let me figure this out. Let me work hard at it and figure out what resentments and defenses and fears I have. Well, it feels, yeah. Gracia?
Yeah, so with the list, you have a part that has to make that list, right?
Yes.
Like there's a part that has to figure it out, like you're saying. It's like, okay, I have to write down all and figure it out and remember. And then, it's, the way I did it, and I did more than one, is in columns. And so, but it's also doesn't say, oh, let's bring the higher power in with us to do this. Like, even though that's something that should be done. I've had witnessed experiences with people that didn't have maybe secure trust in sponsorship or whatever, and they were told, keep looking, keep going, and it was not good at all, and they ended up hospitalized because it brought up a lot of trauma that they didn't have the ability to process, right? Like the 12 steps isn't really, it's supposed to be someone guiding you and holding your hand and having community to hold you while you're doing this, but that's not always ideal, especially with all the Zoom stuff. Having connection, right, and community is really helpful if you're going into these very scary, dark places. It's almost like you do bypass protectors to unravel and look at some dark stuff that could be very destabilizing,
Yeah,
as well. So it's listen, it was written, I don't even know when the 12 steps actually were written, like the 12 and 12. There is a specific book for that Bill wrote, but the 12 step started like with 6 kind of spiritual things to do by the Washingtonians. It was the 30s is when it was developed, right? Like the whole concept of the 12 steps. And so it's evolved. And I think that maybe now the ACA has moved away, although I've heard you, do the 12 steps and then do loving parent, right? Like, so and then there's this, I forget the guy who rewrote like some of the 12 steps for ACA. So it's evolved.
yeah.
The guidance of the 12-step programs to be less traumatic, I believe.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, that it has shifted. The 12-step has, there's a shift. And, you know, the guidebook, the person who wrote it knows IFS. That's what my understanding is. So that's somebody, I heard it from somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know if they know of IFS, but the concept of loving parent or inner child is not just IFS, right? It's been around for decades. And John Bradshaw was one of the people that started with the inner child. And he what's different about IFS and everything else is that it focuses on that we have the access to the self energy within. And so loving parent in AACA is not self, it is a manager part.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
that is the difference.
That's the sense I got when I was reading the book. I thought that is a part. There is no way it's self, because, you know, this loving parent needs to guide the other part, the alcoholic or whatever part, to, like, you know, tell it the truth, okay? Rather than embrace it and accept it and with loving compassion, where, you know, the power of IFS lies. As you said, you know, that's was my understanding, that the loving parent in 12-step felt to me like a manager, but with great qualities though, because there's still compassion and all those qualities in this kind of a loving parent.
I think.
Yeah. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, no, I think, as I said before, it depends. Each person is going to come to, well, I don't know why I'm defending 12 steps, but, you know, so because there is the view that, you know, 12 steps isn't for everybody, but the 12 steps is designed to deal with addiction.
Yeah.
And addiction isn't easy. And it is about a place going to, you're in a very difficult place. And so, you know, yeah, it was written in the 30s, but it's evolved. And yeah, and Bill W., he was in therapy, psychotherapy, and he was changing as he went on. And so yeah, an ACA, and today, you know, it's Codependence Anonymous is another fellowship. Addiction to people pleasing, addiction to caretaking, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, addiction to sex, addiction to love, all these other things, which the 12 steps is a very good structured way of dealing with complex problems. Keeps it simple. Keeps it.
Yeah, I think it would be a lot. This 12-step is, it seems to me, it's a better approach than, you know, like talk therapy, compared to talk therapy.
Well, no, I think it can involve talk therapy. Anything can work in 12 steps. That's the thing. It's open.
Okay.
It depends on the approach of the person. Some people are very rigid, like anything, and some people it's very open. It can be anything. That's why IFS therapy. My journey was therapy alongside 12-step. So I've always done the two together. They've not been, and spirituality. They've always been, yeah. So, but everybody brings themselves to.
Okay, I love, Mark says that higher power in 12-step is self in IFS. Loving parent is perhaps Bradshaw. There's no AINON or AA book literature that focuses on or uses term loving parent.
Not an AA book. There is that ACA book, which
the ICP, the Loving Parent Guidebook. That's the one we were reading.
That's the Adult Children of Alcoholics or Dysfunctional Families. Yeah, that fellowship talks about the loving parent. Yes, and like Grace was saying, John Bradshaw is he's 20 years. He wrote the book Healing the Shame That Binds You, and he talked about the inner teen, the inner child, the inner toddler. You know, he developed that or got that not from IFS. You know, because it was already out there. But he got that thing about ACA is all about getting in touch with your inner child, whatever that means. Yeah, and Jung worked with AA, as Marlene said. Jung was involved at the outset of AA as well, Carl Jung.
Yeah,
so,
Marlene said, yeah. I'm not sure, Grace talked about the Washingtonian movement, also known as the Washingtonian Temperance Society or Washingtonian Total Abstinence Society. Was a 19th century temperance organization that preceded Alcoholics Anonymous by almost a century. While the founders of AA were likely unaware of the Washingtonians' existence, the Washingtonian movement influenced AA in a few ways.
And I'm sorry I didn't copy the like copying, but the reason I put that is because there were originally, I believe, 6 steps that AA started with, and that was from the Washingtonian movement, and then it evolved, and that's why I put that the actual 12 and 12 wasn't written to the 50s. So it's been a constant evolution, and here we are in 2024, right? Like finally, they're switching. A lot of people are recognizing that. Listen, why are people talking about IFS, right? 12 steps is not enough.
It's not.
It can only help so much.
Yeah.
And that's why they also recommend to getting professional help. And the chapter that Young actually wrote in the big book talks about that. You know, some people need medication as well. Like it's not just about abstinence. You know, so it's very, again, everything that we know about the brain today, they didn't know back then as well, right? Like so, and it's very had a very religious temperance, you know, moral, you know, the word moral, right? And then even defenses, the word, you know, character defects, I should say, you know, some of the wording is and it's all written about he. That's another thing that people like were like, when are we going to put, you know, she in here? Like it's very patriarchal as well.
Well, his wife founded Al-Anon, which is that's for the wives of people, or for the partners of not just wives, husband or whatever. But she founded Al-Anon, so yeah. But you're right, yeah, because it's very 1930s, which is, and it, you know, obviously it needs to develop, but the inspiration was obviously meaningful because it's. I just got a call from somebody from one of my fellowships, so I'm going to have to leave.
All right, great. Guys, I will end this recording. Thank you very much for all your contribution. We can continue. You don't have to leave. We can continue in private. Stop recording.